If you live in Utah, if you visit Utah, you're visiting sites. Whether you know it or not, they're everywhere. We live amongst our past and the past of other peoples every day.
I think it is just amazing that someone had the forethought to donate this 200 acres, almost 200 acres of land next to the lake. The thing when I come out here, besides the petroglyphs, that I really enjoy is a sense of peace. And just listening to nature and looking at the mountains. We have the mountains surrounding us. You have the lakes, you have the birds. It's a treasure. And I just enjoy it. And I enjoy sharing it with others and with my family.
I don't think many people would expect that one of the most important sites in this area's history is right across the lake from Provo. But right here, we have a pivotal point in human history where people who have been foragers for 8,000 years prior, who have been hunting and gathering all through the Great Basin that way, suddenly turn their direction east and south and welcome in and become agriculturalists who are pursuing the Corn Lifeway up from the Pueblo area. It's really amazing right here because we can see the histories of these people as they shift how they're living. We can see that in the rock. We can almost read it, like a history book. So down here we start in the Archaic. And what we probably think is late Archaic for this area. So maybe about 1 or 2000 BC up to about AD 1. And you can see the imagery is abstract. It's very curvy. We call it Great Basin Abstract Curvilinear to keep it simple. So this tradition is super old. It is a great-great-granddaughter of one of the earliest traditions that we have here in North America that is Great Basin Abstract Rectilinear. See that over, towards the Reno side of the Great Basin. By the time that phenomenon comes over here, it's been several thousand years. Not clear to me why we don't see this old stuff in Utah. We just don't. And usually it's coming in that wavy style tradition. So this is some of the earliest stuff that we have here in the preserve, but it's not the earliest stuff that we have for Great Basin foragers. So this design shows everyone's orientation westward. This was a sea of foragers lapping up against the shores of the Wasatch. This was the farthest east that people were going to go because their way of life did not need the resources of the high mountains. No one was really excited to go skiing at that point. So this is the furthest east, a sea of foragers going west. Now, when it comes to the end of the late Archaic, and again, they didn't know it was the end, but when it comes to about 0 AD through about AD 400, now new immigrants start coming up from down that way. We know them today as the archaeological Fremont culture. And those folks were growing corn, beans, and squash and bringing with them a lot of new social structure that had never been needed before. Now people are building irrigation ditches. Once you have an irrigation ditch, you need a guy to tell you when your head gate is going to open. So now you have someone with more power than someone else in the community. So communities started changing. They started crystallizing into places on the landscape. And so everywhere that you see metropolitan Utah Valley was metropolitan Fremont. We had pit house villages dotting the landscape, particularly clustered around these areas where rivers came in, where rivers fed into Utah lakes. So places like The Jordan River drainage is a good one, Provo River, and then on down the line. Communities like Goshen, communities like Provo, communities like Lehigh, all had Fremont folks back in the day. And so the rock imagery starts reflecting that change in population. So this is one of our best examples of Fremont rock imagery. And it might not look that special from the outside. You know, we still have someone who's kind of in, you know, what we might call a stick figure form today. But as an archaeologist, what I really see is this huge headdress. This is really reminiscent of plumed headdresses that we see all the way out towards the Colorado border. And actually in Mantle's Cave, just across on the Colorado side of Dinosaur National Monument, we have a preserved example of this headdress made out of northern flicker feathers. Northern flickers are a really common woodpecker out here, but they have really beautiful like red, orange, and brown feathers. And so folks had made a headdress using a little bit of, I believe it was deer skin and sinew, and attaching that probably across the forehead. And they had an enormous, beautiful plumed headdress. Looks just like this. So this is showing folks no longer being attached to what's going on out west, but really being hooked into what's going on out east. Whatever sort of ceremony, religion, ritual, and social changes there were that were going on across the Fremont area, across much of modern day Utah, and into the early ancestral Pueblo world, that's what was happening out here. But in maybe a muted sense, because people could still escape out into the desert. The Fremont blended together that farming and foraging. And so if people were saying stuff you didn't like out here, if you weren't getting treated the way that you thought you would as a Fremont farmer, you would go ahead and be a Fremont forager. So people were coming into and out of the farming life, but definitely hooked into something that was happening across the American Southwest at the time. What we have is a culture history of those hunting and gatherers, and they are engaged in cultural traditions that span between here and Reno. So, you know, hundreds of miles across the Great Basin. And starting around AD 0-ish and continuing to about AD 1300, we find that people are looking at Corn Lifeway as something that is important to them. They start living in more permanent structures, more habitations like villages over just under modern day Provo. And they're using this area still as a sacred space that they've built up from their family over generations for thousands of years. And they're still coming out here and engaging in those old ways while engaging in their modernity of agriculture. So over there by Provo, we have pit houses. Those were obviously really permanent, but when you come out here, if you need shelter, you're going to build something that's a little bit more temporary. And so the solution is a wickiup. So we have a small rock ring, and often an archaeologist will just stop there and will say, it's a rock ring. I can't necessarily tell you its function. We presume it's a wickiup until proven otherwise because it's too big for storage. It's a little bit on the small end to be a shelter or a habitation. But in this landscape that might be more ceremonial, maybe it is just for a night or two, just for one or two people, and it's not designed for a huge family or anything. So the wickiup, we've got at least 2 courses of stone. So over here, it looks like right about this area, we can see that the stones are stacked one on top of each other. Nature doesn't like to do that normally, so we know that it's going to be people that made this. And they're stacked one on top of each other. Some have fallen into the center. And so for a wickiup, they're going to put these stones here, and they're going to use it to pin together some larger pieces of wood, some, saplings that they've cut down, or some larger green branches, and arch them over the top, lash them at the top, and then starting at the bottom, taking whole branches of sagebrush or whatever else is around, and lashing those all around the outside to make a thatched roof. Looks like there is probably an entrance right about here, between that stone and about here. So people would have this, beehive-shaped arched, woolly looking thing, and you'd be able to go inside and be reasonably well sheltered from wind, rain, snow, etc. So you can imagine if people were using this area in some of the winter months or even a harsh springtime, it might be really nice to have a wiki up here just for your overnight. So we won't stand in the anthill, we learned, but around here, folks were doing more than just writing on rocks. They were also flaking tools. It's probably the case that you need some flaked tools in order to write on the rocks. So one of the ways people were making the rock imagery was with a hammer and chisel. And so you do want your chisel to be sharp. So this is a really nice example of what we call a biface thinning flake or a bifacial reduction flake. A biface, you could think of it as like, it's a piece of stone that's worked on both sides. It's got a nice sharp margin to it. And so this would have been flaked off just like that. And they would have popped it off here, and it's got like this nice curve to it. This is the platform. This is a flaking scar in it. It's a little hard to see from this angle, but this is bulbed out. It's called the bulb of percussion. This is the ventral surface. It was what was attached to the flake. Excuse my hands, I have a puppy and he's been biting. So you can see these other flake scars that are on here, and like I said, this will be on the edge of it. And so when people are making a chipstone tool, they come at it from this angle and they pop it off like that, and then you've got an even sharper, finer edge right there. So this is a piece of chert, cryptocrystalline silicate, and this is really indicative of what we find across the preserve. We can tell by the fact that it's not a huge flake and it doesn't have any of the exterior of the rock on it, that this flake was pretty near the end of the manufacture process of a tool. And it also probably means that there's not fantastic tool stone available here, that people were importing tool stone. This is one of the reasons why it's so important that they were in communication with people out in the Great Basin, because those folks are walking around a lot. They're foragers. They get good tool stone. We'll put this back right where we found it and then not get stung by ants. As people come out to the preserve, they do find a lot of artifacts, and so stewards like to cache some of them in here for a show and tell. In here, we've got a couple of things that are interesting. This is ground stone. You can see as the light kind of catches it a little bit differently. The shadow here, you can see all of that pecking as people were going chink, chink, chink to make it the shape they wanted. Here too. And then on this side, super flat and smooth. And we have some striations, some little use wear marks that indicate that it was probably used in that direction. So ground stone like this, people started using grinding stones 10,000 years ago, maybe a little bit more. It was an important tool for folks because once you're able to grind things like seeds and berries and nuts, you're able to start storing them. Greater processing allows you to extort those calorie gains a little bit more. And so even when people weren't yet farmers, they didn't know they would be farmers, a million generations down the line, they started with grindstones like this, grinding stones. And then it was really useful when agriculturalists came up from the south and the southeast at where we're at right here, because people already had some of the toolkit that was going to be really important for grinding that corn down later.
I like to imagine being a hunter out here with my hunter friends and getting antelope or making a turkey net so we could get fish. And and then making a fire at the end of the day so that our family across the lake over there in Provo knows that we're okay, that we're sending a few smoke signals and saying, hey, we made it, we're fine, we got food.
Yeah. Things also that to come out here and follow a tour, and especially if kids are involved, and to see the discovery and to see how they're as amazed as I am every time I come. But it's wonderful to know that it's just not me, it's anyone who comes out here. It just is blown away by what's here and how it's hidden and how it's been here forever. That for me is just the amazement, and then the appreciation of, yeah, what a wonderful asset this is.
So this was in the Smith family for generations, and they have done an absolutely amazing job taking care of the site. Here in Utah, we do have some fairly substantial and significant sites owned by private landowners, and in general, they do a really tremendous job keeping this safe. By contrast, we have some areas that have been really publicly available that have been damaged by the public. And that's because maybe we don't do as good a job as we need to educating everybody about how to visit these places. So coming to the Smith Preserve offers us an opportunity to show people what places look like when they're really well stewarded, and gives us that opportunity to tell people how to walk across the space, why it's important to stay on trails, why it's important not to leave things behind like sunflower seeds or candy wrappers, why it's important not to touch the rock art. It gives them an example of what's possible, and that's so inspiring, and they're able to take that with them to other sites, and they're also able to tell that to other people in their life. And so the Smith Preserve, I mean, what an amazing testament to community preservation this is. And this is one of my favorite sites in Utah.
One of the great things about the preserve is the collection of what we've got. I mean, we've got a lot of petroglyphs, we've got some various artifacts, and a lot of that is due to the Smith family. When you move an image, it's like taking the Mona Lisa and hanging it in your bathroom. I mean, it doesn't make any sense in your bathroom. That image might look cool in your front yard, but the reason it was put down there for a reason. The image was created in this location for a reason.
I think some of the favorite petroglyphs that I have seen are the large anthropomorphs, which are human figures. There's 3 of them on a rock over there. I just think it's pretty interesting, and they're the only large ones, that large. They're about 2.5 feet tall. And it's just very interesting. And then I enjoy Solstice Rock, just imagining, why did they do all those concentric circles there? Someone came out to check on the solstice to see if it lined up, and it didn't. But it's pretty interesting, and yeah, you wonder what half of the geometrics here are. We don't know, and so we have fun guessing.
I do think it's a special place. Personally, I just feel connected to the land and the people in the past that have been here. And I also think it's amazing that people volunteer to show people, to guide people through the area, through the hike. It's kind of a lovely gesture to people in the past that we appreciate them, and we understand that they were here, and we will do what we can to preserve what they left. I kind of fell in love with the place when I toured it, and so I signed up, and that's been about 6 years ago.
Here in Utah, we have, I want to say, about 140,000 known archaeological sites. And that's with only less than 10% of the state surveyed. Now that sounds like a lot of sites, but when you're looking at 13,000 years of human history, and when you're considering that a lot of these sites are, you know, a bunch of flakes from producing a chipstone tool, or a bunch of tin cans from where people were dumping their garbage outside of town, suddenly the number of sites starts to look a little narrower. So it's important to preserve places like this because every site tells a story. And you don't necessarily know that story until research happens. The research here at this site is so fresh new. It hasn't even been published yet. It's important to preserve these places because we're still in the process of discovery. We're still learning about these places. We don't need to know every single last site in Utah, but someday we will. And someday later, we'll know the stories of every single last site in Utah. And those are the stories of the people who make this place currently, the people who called this place home in the past, and their stories as living descendants today are what's the most important. And so we preserve these places for themselves, and we preserve these places for the people.